bro. God, I hate this stupid stock and all the clowns that pump it on YouTube. Anyway, welcome back to Strongman Personal Finance. So Palantir had earnings. The stock went up, so of course we got to talk about it. So I was skimming the report. Let's read some of the highlights, okay? Q4 2023. GAAP net income of $93 million, still mostly from interest, with a 15% profit margin. GAAP income from operations of $66 million, representing an 11% margin. That's the thing you should focus on, okay? This is clown earnings. This is with interest because they have massive amount of cash and cash equivalents on their balance sheet. This is what matters, so at least that's improving. I'll give them that. GAAP earnings per share of 0.04. So you get 4 cents of earnings for 1 share of Palantir every quarter. Man, that's a high earnings yield right there. Adjusted EPS, which is clown earnings, of 0.08. Now, here's the first positive sign. Revenue grew 20% year over year. So I don't know if they landed some kind of contract and they recognized a bunch of revenue or what, but their revenue has exploded, at least relative to the prior quarters, by increasing year over year. Still much less than the 20% compounded we were promised, all right? If we go look at Palantir's revenue by revenue growth, they had a massive deceleration in revenue, bottoming out in the second quarter of 2023, and now they've started to reaccelerate revenue. But I've noticed something, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so revenue growth rates are coming back, at least temporarily, and that's a good thing. This is still a clown stock, and I will cover that in a second. So, what are the highlights? U.S. commercial revenue grew 70%. That is a very massive increase. Customer count grew 55%. So they are packing on customers year over year. And they are increasing their commercial revenue year over year. And all the shills, oh my God, I'm such a genius, bro. Let's see. Okay, so we know all the revenue. So let's go ahead and look at some of the margins. So we know they had 20% revenue growth. We know their income from operations is massively increased. We know their cash flow from operations has increased pretty significantly. And their adjusted free cash flow. So they have some positive signs, okay? Here's where I start to worry about Palantir. I start to wonder. Revenue for Q1 of 2024 is expected to be between 612 and 616, with adjusted clown income from operations of between 196 to 200 million. So if their revenue is 616, which is the best case scenario for Q1, that means that their revenue is going to grow by 616 divided by 525. They're projecting their revenue to grow 17%. So that's almost a deceleration. They had pretty significant growth this earnings. They've reinvigorated their revenue growth rate over the last couple of quarters. But now they project it to come back down, okay? And that's not the worst of the news. So revenue between 2.6 to 2.668 billion. So their full year 2024 revenue, let's see. So what is their revenue this year? Did they give us the full year revenue? Okay. So their full year revenue was 225, and their total revenue they're projecting is 2668. So we take this is on the high end, 26668 minus 2.225 divided by 2.668. So we're looking at a 16% revenue growth year over year. Okay? Wow, that's very close to the 30%. Adjusted free cash flow, adjusted income from operations. So they're stupid. I hate when they do adjusted. Adjusted is just like they add back random expenses because, oh, it makes us look better. So their adjusted income from operations they're projecting will be 850 for the full year 2024. So if we divide that by their revenue that they're projecting on the high end, oops, I screwed that up. Let's do 850 divided by 2668. So they're looking at a 32% margin, which is a good improvement, but that's adjusted income. I don't know what that means. It's clown earnings of 31%. So they're projecting a very rapid increase in operating income. Here is where I begin to wonder about Palantir, okay? It's all about valuation. How much are you paying for future earnings? We know that they're diluting. We can see the dilution right here. It's almost, 10% increase in shares year over year? Pretty significant share increase. That's the first thing right there. Balance sheet's fine. Cash flows are doing good. Here's where I begin to wonder about Palantir. So we look at their ratios, right? And obviously I'm an index fund investor. I just let the market figure it out. If Palantir becomes a $1 trillion company, great. It'll be in VT in the top 10%, sadly. Price to sales is 17. Okay, so you're paying $17 for $1 of sales, theoretically, if you look at it from a valuation perspective. Price to books of 11, price to free cash flow of 76, and price to operating cash flow of 74. It's very expensive. Very, very expensive. Now, if you want to look at a company that's comparable, now you may be like, oh, well, Meta, it's not like Palantir. Palantir does all this spooky alien stuff, echoes. And Meta basically collects ad revenue and makes clown avatars, okay? But they're actually pretty comparable when you look at it from a margin perspective. So look at Meta's gross margins in the low 80s. What is Palantir's gross margins? In the 80s, okay? Meta has higher operating margins, much higher operating margins, and that's been consistent, and much higher profit margins. Free cash flow margin is in roughly the low 30s. Except for that last quarter, their free cash flow margin was a little bit less than Meta's. So Palantir, with slower revenue growth, let's look at Meta's year-over-year revenue growth, 24% year-over-year revenue growth, compared to Palantir's, 20%? That's projected to go down? Now, Meta's valuation, price to sales, is only 8.75. Price to books. On every metric, Meta is cheaper. It's more profitable with the same gross margins. So a company that's growing faster, that is projected to grow faster, has much stronger margins, is valued at a much lower price to sales. I don't understand, okay? I don't understand why people are so hyped up with this stock. I mean, the valuation is just insane. It's like they're pricing in, 50% revenue growth year over year. It makes absolutely no sense to me, okay? But like I said, maybe the genius is on the, what is that stupid podcast they do? I forgot the name. Maybe the geniuses know something that I don't. But me personally, I don't want to risk my money if I was to buy an individual stock. Buying a stock so richly valued, that is so hyped up, all based on AI, that's not even projecting crazy revenue growth going into the future. Doesn't make sense to me, okay? So overall, the earnings, they are improving their earnings. I can't say they haven't. They've definitely increased their operating margin, which is what I want to focus on, because if you look in their income statement, all right, so they had income loss from operations of $65 million, interest income of $44. So there's still a huge part of their bottom line profit is still coming from interest income. And you can see the increase year over year. That ain't going to last forever. Okay, at some point, interest rates are going to come down. And the reason that they have such high interest income is because they have the cash equivalents, and marketable securities, which are paying interest. This is probably like treasury bonds and crap like that. Okay? So overall, earnings are fine. They're profitable, both on an operational standpoint and on a GAAP standpoint. Stock-based compensation, they've managed to get that under control. Revenue growth is getting better, but when you compare it to companies with similar margins, because a dollar is a dollar, I don't see why this company is so richly valued. AI, my hot guy, right? All right, so that's Palantir. I guess I'll just have to be poor. If I had bought the dip, if I had bought Palantir over here, got my YouTube channel pumping, and then I kept buying the dip, I'd probably be broken even by now. All right, guys, have a wonderful night. Cheers.